Coming up on today's edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast, it is all things Al Davis on this Independence Day and what would be his 94th birthday. That's right, all things Al Davis on this 4th of July, Independence Day, here on the Locked On Raiders podcast.
Just win. Just win. Just win. Just win.
The autumn wind is a raider, pillaging just for fun. He'll knock you round and upside down and laugh when he's conquered and won. And won. And won. And won. And won.
And welcome in, Raider Nation, to another edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen of the day. Make sure you subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts to get the latest edition of the show. Of course, if you're checking us out on YouTube, thanks so much for giving us a few minutes of your time, whenever you can, however you can. We definitely appreciate that. We also appreciate my man Ari. Does a great job each and every day making sure we're up on YouTube, looking good, sounding good. He does the very best he can. He has to deal with me, so he's doing the very best he can. You can check him out on Twitter at Ari Produces. You could always hit me up on Twitter as well, at your boy Q254. And, of course, we got the Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line that normally, 9 times out of 10, it's wide open like some old school TV antennas. Won't have any calls or texts today, but you can keep the number handy anyway, 707-654-4693. And the reason why we won't have any calls or texts today is because we're having a show. It's a throwback show. I do it each and every 4th of July ever since I've taken over doing the Locked On Raiders podcast. And as the show has continued to grow, I want to make sure I continue to bring it back each and every 4th of July. And again, it's a tribute to the late, great Al Davis, who would be 94 today, as he was born on the 4th of July and, of course, passed away in 2011. But Jon Kingdon, I did an interview when I was on ESPN Central Texas, did a really lengthy interview with Jon Kingdon, co-author Behind the Shield, the book of the life and times of Al Davis. Originally, this interview was recorded in 2019, and it was when he was kind of on a tour to promote the book Behind the Shield. And so I got an opportunity to catch up with him in 2019, and I've ran this interview each and every year. Now, next year, maybe I'll go ahead and catch up with Jon Kingdon or someone else and do another interview that has to do with Al Davis and make sure we run it on the 4th of July. But again, I think it's a nice little tip of the cap to the late, great Al Davis, and especially here on the Locked On Podcast Network, where a show today is actually not required since it's a holiday, and just like a lot of people are off work, the network gives us the day off as well. But again, because Al Davis was born on the 4th of July, I like to have this show at the very least out there. So if you're sitting around, maybe you're barbecuing, maybe you got some family around and you want to have some entertainment, there's nothing on TV, you've already watched the hot dog eating contest and you don't really want to watch any of the sports that are on there, music's not what you want to hear, maybe you want to pop in the podcast and hear about Al Davis. So today's episode of the Locked On Raiders podcast, before we get to any of that, is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. They help you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Of course, I'll tell you a lot more about them following segment number 1 after we get into part 1 of the conversation with Jon Kingdon. But before we even do that, I did want to give an update on former Raiders tight end Foster Moreau. He is a guy that found out he has Hodgkin lymphoma, and he tweeted out on Monday, after a few tumultuous months, I've been blessed with the news that I am in full remission from Hodgkin lymphoma. I'm so grateful to everyone who reached out to offer their love and support. Our prayers were answered. From here, I'll continue to live my life as God intended. Again, that's for Foster Moreau, former Raider tight end, now with the New Orleans Saints. And again, it was because of that free agent visit to the Saints, he even found out about the Hodgkin lymphoma to begin with. So thank God for that. And also thank God that he's in the state that he's in right now, of full remission. He gets to continue with his NFL career. And, obviously it's a big time challenge that he's still got to continue to face and battle each and every day. But if I know Foster like I know Foster, and I'm not trying to say he's my best friend, but I know him well enough to know that he's going to fight and claw and kick that thing in the butt as he's been doing. So shout out to Foster Moreau, full remission from Hodgkin lymphoma. Not only is Raider Nation cheering on Foster, but so is the NFL world. So again, shout out to Foster Moreau for that. Now it's time to jump into part 1 of my conversation with longtime Raider scout and running buddy Al Davis, Jon Kingdon, as we talk all things life and times of Al Davis as on what would be his now 94th birthday as of the 4th of July in 2023. Joining me now on the phone line to talk the late, great Al Davis is Jon Kingdon, the co-author of Al Davis Behind the Shield. And Jon, it's been a few years since the last time I talked to you, but with the 4th of July here, we obviously celebrate the great nation that we live in, but we also celebrate the greatness of the man, the myth, the legend, the guy who had the vision of the Raiders. That's Al Davis. It's his birthday as well. As a guy who was close and has so many stories about Al, What do you think of? What comes to your mind when his birthday rolls around each and every year?
Well, I always think that, it's the one day of the year we really got off, and the joke around the office was that we're getting that July 4th off because it's Al's birthday. And that always worked. Or I still send him, we had a clipping service, and I always made it a point to still send him those articles that day as well. But, it was a genuine experience. He was certainly a very key part of my life. I was there 33 years, and just right off the top of my head, I'm 66 now, so I really spent basically half my life with the Raiders and working under Al Davis, and it was a genuine experience. Just every day was a challenge. He always had a lot of ideas, and he always wanted to. It was a battle to keep up with him, but the longer you worked there, the more you learned how to anticipate what he was looking for. And if sometimes he asked me a question I didn't have the answer for about a player, well, I always knew he was going to ask that question in the future about all the other players. So I think he appreciated that aspect of the way I worked with him.
You mentioned how every day is a challenge. You knew it was going to be a battle, good or bad. It really didn't matter. But in your opinion, what was it about him? What made him tick? What made him be so special and be that guy that was going to make a challenge each and every day?
Well, he took a great deal of pride in what he did. He always wanted to be successful. And, although he did keep up on a lot of things around the world, the political situation, other sports. He loved women's basketball, particularly the colleges. But this football was his life. It was 24/7, and there was nothing that he was going to overlook. He kept up on every little detail, and you knew it didn't take you very long to know that that if he had like a lawyer's mentality. If he asked you the question, he basically more often than not knew what the answer was going to be. And when we had new coaches coming in, I would sit down with them, and that's the one thing I would tell him. I'd say, look, if he asks you a question, you don't know the answer. Don't make up something up, because again, he probably knows what the answer is, and he'll catch you on that. And if you don't know the answer, then, make sure that you'll know it the next time. But it's better to admit you don't know something than make something up and really get caught by him in that regard.
So it's one of those scenarios, almost like when your parents used to say, they used to ask you a question, but they already knew the answer. My mom used to tell me that all the time. I don't ask questions to you that I don't already know the answer. It was the same thing with Al.
Well, again, like your mother, I guess I always heard it was the lawyers were always told, don't ask a question unless you know what the answer is going to be. And again, that was kind of fun. It was it's kind of fun also to it was a challenge when you could kind of beat him sometimes,
right.
Convince him otherwise of what his opinion was going into an argument. And more often than not, he would say okay and hang up quickly and not let you kind of bask in that small victory.
That's awesome. That is absolutely awesome. The Raiders, they just announced the 60th season, the commemorative logo celebrating 60 years of Raider football. And there's players that come and go from team to team, especially nowadays with free agency. But every time I hear a player talk about putting on that silver and black, putting on that helmet, putting on those colors, it was just different. What made it so much different putting on those colors than it did putting on someone else, some other team in the league?
Well, I think we had an owner, again, that there was probably only one other owner, Paul Brown in Cincinnati, that had experience as a coach, in coaching experience besides being an owner. But I think Al was also really a people person. I mean, he loved the players, and the players realized that. And he took great pleasure in taking players that hadn't been successful in with other teams, and would bring them here, and he would give them space and give them time to learn and kind of give them a chance to, show the way we were doing things, particularly when we were successful. And, it was like, there were so many examples of it. Just one, Ethan Horton was was number one pick, running back out of North Carolina by the Kansas City Chiefs, and really a good guy. And Al loved projecting guys to different positions. In fact, I have a whole chapter in the book about the success Al had in moving guys to other spots. And Ethan Horton came in, we made him a tight end, and he made the Pro Bowl. So it was things like that. Raymond Chester was a wingback actually at Morgan State. And I think he also had a great feeling. He was way ahead of his time and other teams regarding minorities.
Right.
He was very much in support of that, and a lot of it was the AFL as well. But he and the AFL were at the forefront of drafting players from the predominantly black colleges. The Willie Browns and Art Shell at Maryland Eastern Shore. And, although Willie was out of Grambling, but he had traded for him with the Broncos. But we had great success players in that regard. Again, the Chiefs were another team that had great success in that regard. Willie Lanier and Buck Buchanan and Ernie Ladd, people like that. So I think the players appreciated how much he cared for them, number one, and then number two, they were always impressed at how much he knew. I would talk to players that we would bring in players, and then I, after they were finished with Al, I said, how'd it go? I said, he knew every play I played on the strong side, on the weak side, in this game 2 years ago, and they just walked out of those rooms feeling really impressed, and the idea, I'd like to play for this guy. And that pretty much kind of set the pattern. And I think it was such a strong, had such a great run from when he came in from 63, right up until, after that last Super Bowl, that even though we had, pretty much his last 10 years were not good, I think still his influence and his effect on the organization still carries with, the commitment to excellence, silver and black, things like that. And I think it carried on not only for the players, but for the fans as well.
I'll tell you right now, I know you can't see me, but I just got a smile on my face just listening to these stories. I mean, just listening about the man, it's really incredible. I love it. I'm talking right now to Jon Kingdon, the co-author of Al Davis Behind the Shield, and that's whose life we're celebrating right now. At his birthday is right here upon us, and the great Gil Brandt. And I know that Al had a really good relationship with the Cowboys, the ownership at the Cowboys, Jerry Jones, but the great Gil Brandt, he's going into the Hall of Fame this year. He always talks really highly about Al. One, how proud do you think Al would be to see his buddy Gil go into the Hall of Fame? And really, they kind of, or Gil learned a lot from Al, as far as I'm understanding as well. Is that true?
I know they communicated a great deal, and I used to, at the Combine, Al used to always sit by the starting line. He always liked to see the way guys would start, and Gil would not oftentimes, but a lot, go down there and sit next to Al, and they'd be sharing ideas and such. And, Gil was nice enough to write the introduction to our book. And so I was certainly very pleased at Gil going in there as well. But, Al was the other guy that Al was very close with, ironically, was Jerry Jones.
Right.
And, it was a story where we were going to trade, we wanted to trade up in the second round to get Steve Wisniewski. And Al was talking with Jerry about it, what we're going to give back and forth. And the Cowboys' time on the clock was running out. And Al just said to Jerry, why don't you just take Steve and we'll work out the details. And he did, and then we ended up trading a second and a fourth for Wisniewski. And it worked out both ways because the Cowboys got Moose Johnston,
right,
who turned out to be a really good player. The fourth round player was a guy that didn't make it, but that's neither here nor there. But the one thing I always remembered off of that story after we completed the trade to get Steve, and Al said, Jerry is the only guy that I would have trusted to select Steve and then trade him to us after he drafted him. So that was just a really indication of how close they were. And as always, a lot of times, again, Al always talked about don't talk to anyone, keep everything under your hat, don't talk to people. And I think the one guy that Al did talk to was Jerry Jones. And just an example, when the year Orlando McClain came out, actually our best linebacker was Sean Lee out of Penn State.
Okay.
And, although, it was I think the 12th pick, and Sean had a major knee injury that year, so you really couldn't take him that high. And we said, let's trade down, get a few picks, and take him either late in the first or early in the second. And Al was kind of enamored with the workout numbers of McClain. And then who takes Sean Lee in the second round but Jerry Jones? We all kind of look at each other. See, I wonder how come Jerry liked him so much, even with that knee injury. So I think that was just another indication of how much Al enjoyed Jerry.
Yeah, and I remember you telling a story about the time when Al was at that time Valley Ranch, and he was actually wearing cowboy gear because he was working out.
Yeah, he wanted to. And my great regret, this was before cell phones. And, the combine was actually held in Dallas that year. There were 3 different combines. And I think there were 5 different teams there, the Cowboys, Seattle, the Cardinals, and Buffalo, and us. And, and Al liked working out, actually. It was he liked running and such. And everyone had left, and Buck Buchanan was the equipment manager there. And Buck came out and brought, Al workout gear. And it was such almost a contradiction in terms to see Al wearing Dallas Cowboy gear. And again, I would have loved to, again, we didn't have phones with cameras in it, but that would have been a picture that I probably could have sold right now for a lot of money.
So that was part 1 of my conversation right there with Jon Kingdon, talking all things Al Davis, and hopefully you're enjoying this conversation, especially if it's the first time that you heard it. Really good stuff. Lengthy conversation, about 30-plus minutes. I did this interview when I was on ESPN Central Texas. It goes back all the way to 2019. So it's a throwback. It's an oldie, but it's a goodie as far as I'm concerned, and you'll hear part 2 of that conversation coming up after I tell you about the title sponsor of the show, which is LinkedIn Jobs. These days, every new potential hire could feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain you have access to the best qualified candidates available. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs help you find the right people for your team faster and for free. And I'll tell you right now, hiring could be a challenge. Me being the program director at Las Vegas Sports Network, Lotus Broadcasting, we've gone through the hiring process a few times, and sometimes the person looks like a really good candidate only to find out that they're not. Well, LinkedIn Jobs will help you get through that quicker, faster, and stronger. All you got to do is post your job for free at LinkedIn Jobs and add your job in the purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you're hiring. Simple tools like screening questions make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and who you'd like to hire. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires for its leading competitors. Right now, LinkedIn Jobs will help you find that qualified candidate you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, Raider Nation, here we go. Part 2 of my conversation with Jon Kingdon, 30-year-plus scout for the Raiders. He was a guy that was a longtime running buddy of the late, great Al Davis. Obviously, he has got plenty of stories, co-author of Behind the Shield. This interview goes back to 2019 when I was part of ESPN Central Texas when I recorded this interview, and hopefully it's still as good as it was then as far as I'm concerned. Not my greatest work, but still was able to bring this conversation and bring all this information and stories about Al Davis, and I really thought it was really good stuff from Jon Kingdon. So let's get into part 2 of the conversation where he starts off talking about Raider Nation and what the fan base, the most notorious fans, meant to Al Davis.
Oh, he took such pride in that, and wherever we went, there was actually 2 groups that would, when we were coming into cities, on road games, and I think he took as much pride in the player, in the fans, so many of them meeting us as we were coming into the hotel. But I think he took just as much pride in getting booed heartily as they walked onto the field. I think he saw that as really more of a sign of respect for what he had put together. He just had such great love that, oh, look at that silver and black. I'd be walking along with him. It was something. He loved those colors. He got the black, the colors from the West Point. That's originally where he came up with those colors.
Right, absolutely. That's really, really cool. How would you describe to a fan that has never seen the Raiders as a successful franchise? I mean, I was born in '76, so I remember the Super Bowl in '83, but I wasn't locked in at that point. I wasn't all about it. I wasn't a fanatic. I wasn't crazy at that point. But as some fans are really young, have not seen the Raiders successful, what would you tell them? What does it mean to be a Raider? What does commitment to excellence or just win, baby, mean to those that have not experienced that yet?
Well, it's kind of hard to sell it when they've had such a bad run. Right. They after Mark took over, they thought they made a fairly poor decision in hiring Reggie. That kind of bombed out with a 35% winning percentage. But I think when the teams were really good, we just had a combination of like three factors. One was size, one was speed, and one was toughness, and maybe there's even a fourth factor, which was pride.
Mm-hmm.
I think the players took a great deal of pride. They all looked out for each other and such. And, I'm kind of excited. I think they've done a nice job. I'm a big fan of Coach Gruden.
Okay.
We wrote 2 chapters on him, and probably could have written about 2 more. And then, Greg Papa, who they unfortunately let go of, was a great play-by-play guy with the Warriors. I'm sorry, he did the Warriors too, but with the Raiders, and he's actually going to be the play-by-play guy with the 49ers this year. And anyway, he made a great comment when they brought Mayock in instead of Reggie McKenzie, and he said, Mayock's got all the energy, he's got all the focus, and and it's a good match with Jon Gruden, whereas Reggie McKenzie, it'd take him 10 minutes to get out of his chair. So I think they're pointed in the right direction. They hired, they got a really good director of scouting now, Jimmy Abrams, who at one point came over from the Cowboys, and is really a good scout. And they also got Walter Juliff, who'd been with the Cowboys for a number of years. So I think they're pointed in the right direction that way.
Do you feel, or did Al ever say anything about trading Jon Gruden after that Tuck Rule game, as far as that being one of his biggest mistakes that he ever made as an owner?
He was not easy on admitting mistakes.
Understood.
No one was going to confront him on it either.
Right.
But I'm pretty sure that he did. And again, part of and it wasn't one of the things I could interview him about or talk to him about. I mean, just because I spoke up against it, I couldn't believe he was doing it. And in retrospect, I think of every so often I think of what I should have said to him to really convince him not to do this. But we had a chapter. The 3 guys that he really had problems with publicly were Kenny Stabler, Marcus Allen, and Jon Gruden, and those 3 had become the face of the organization, and I think it really bothered him. I never confronted him on it, but I think that's pretty much that's the coincidence, the similarity in those 3 guys having issues with Al.
It's funny because I did a show one time, and that was one of the topics. If you could sit down and talk to Al Davis and ask him anything without getting in trouble for asking him, what would it be? And the majority of the answers were, what happened between you and Marcus Allen? I think that's the biggest question that is out there for Raider Nation.
Well, he was, first of all, Marcus was great. I mean, he was truly one of my favorite people. I always thought he was the most complete running back in National Football League history. The one thing he didn't have was true breakaway speed, but he had breakaway speed. But he could pass. He was a great blocker. He could break the long run because he was one of those guys that could cut at full speed without losing any speed. He was a great receiver. Again, through great option passes, did everything. And he was just an amazing leader and competitive guy. And when Al kept bringing in people to kind of replace him, whether it was Eric Dickerson or Roger Craig or even, drafting someone like a Vance Mueller, which, just made no sense. It got Marcus so frustrated that, if you recall when Marcus went on national TV with Al Michaels, I think they were still on ABC, and he just said, this guy's trying to kill my career. And then just Al, never forgave that as well. And I know that Marcus even made overtures. I believe the story was at the Hall of Fame when Marcus approached Al, and Al says, I'm not ready to forgive you yet, which I thought I was very disappointed in that. So, there was really the one thing that kind of Al was looking sort of for an excuse to kind of replace Marcus or to blame Marcus. And, you probably won't remember, you really got to be into the Raiders. This was 1986.
Okay.
We started off the year, lost 4 games. I lost our first 3 games, rather. We won our next 5, and then we were lost the game, and then we won our next 3. So we're 8-4, and we're playing the Eagles at home, and it goes into overtime, and we're close enough in field goal range, and we just got to run a couple of plays, and Chris Barnes or Jeff Yeager is going to kick the field goal. And Marcus is so competitive. He tries to make the cut, and the ball pops out of his air, and the Eagle guy picks it up and takes it down to the one, and Cunningham scores on the next play. And then we lose our next 3 games. We end up 8-8 and miss the playoffs. And I think Al, that always bothered him as well. That one thing about the fumble. So, I forgot about that in the book. I would have put that in there, but I thought that was that really always bothered him, and used that as an excuse to kind of look to replace Marcus. And it's just unfortunate because he was great and obviously well deserving of being in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, and then it's worse that he goes to the Kansas City Chiefs and ends up scoring a historic touchdown number 100 against the Raiders. I mean, that had to bother Al as well.
I wouldn't doubt it. And I have to admit, I sort of had mixed feelings about it. It wasn't like you scored and that cost us the game.
Right.
It wasn't a particularly close game for them. So internally, I was kind of happy for Marcus. But this is probably the first time I've actually said that in public. I love Marcus.
Yeah, I'm not mad at you. Breaking news here. It's all good. If Al Davis were alive today, in your opinion, would he be happy? Would he be thrilled that Jon Gruden was back as the head coach of the team right now?
Yeah, I'd like to think so. We had and that was one of the things. We had a good run, with John Roush, and then to John Madden, and then to Tom Flores. And then, we had a bad run of coaches there, from Shanahan was unfortunate. I think he would have been a good coach, but Al just didn't like all the changes he made. And, and Art wasn't very good. And then Mike White was terrible. And Joe Bugle was the right man at the wrong time. I think he would have been better suited in the 60s and 70s because, the tail was wagging the dog at that point. And then John came in.
Right.
I don't think Al really realized what he had with John. I think he saw someone that, that he could kind of, I wouldn't say manipulate, but, he would be sort of, would listen to everything that Al. And he didn't realize this guy was a younger version of Al that worked just as hard as Al ever worked and knew just as much as Al knew in this regard. And then you get rid of him and, went from Bill Callahan to Norv, and then bringing Art back again was, a 2-14 year. And then Kiffin to Cable, and Hugh Jackson at least started playing, coaching well. And then, Reggie gets rid of him and brings in Dennis Allen. And, so it was quite a bad run. And, I think, like I said, I think they're doing well. And John, even though they had a bad year, you hear John talk now. He's such a charismatic leader. The fans are just so excited about it, and I think they've done a really good job of giving all the tools to Derek Carr that are necessary with the offensive line, the receivers, a running back. I think the offense is going to be pretty impressive this year.
And with that being said, I'm glad you mentioned Derek Carr. Do you feel like Derek Carr is the quarterback that could take this franchise from, obviously they had the good season in 2016, but that was 2016. It's been rough going since then. But do you think he's that guy that could take the franchise with Jon Gruden's help, obviously, and lead him far into the future?
Well, I was terribly impressed. If they hadn't drafted him in the second round, I always say the most valuable player that year for the Raiders was Ray Farmer. And they say, well, why was Ray Farmer so valuable? It's because he was the guy that drafted Johnny Manziel instead of Derek Carr in Cleveland. Mm-hmm. So the Raiders don't get Carr. It really was going to be a disaster under Reggie. I think the one thing that's going to be working in Derek's favor that's really worked against him, I think this is the first time he's had the same coordinator 2 years in a row.
Right.
And that just can't be easy to go from one to the other, to the other, to the other. And the other thing I think that John brings to Derek is, I think, again, I was on the outside, but Derek was almost too nice a guy. It's all my fault. Oh, put it all on me. Blah, blah, blah. I think John needed to make him more of a Rich Gannon guy, who, if a guy misses an audible pickup, Gannon would chew him out. If a guy ran the wrong panic, Gannon wouldn't take any crap from the players. And I think he brought out the best in him. I think that's what John is going to. I think that's what John's putting more into Derek is more of a kind of a tough leadership, sort of a tough love kind of quarterback that should work in in Derek's favor that way.
There is part two of the conversation right there with Jon Kingdon, co-author of Behind the Shield, talking all things Al Davis, 4th of July. This would be his 94th birthday. Each and every year, I like to pay tribute and tip the cap to the late, great Al Davis. Coming up in part three, you'll hear the final part of the conversation with Jon Kingdon. We'll talk about, well, Al Davis stories, as you could imagine, as we close things out here on the Locked On Raiders podcast. Here we go, Raider Nation, part three of the conversation with Jon Kingdon, co-author of Behind the Shield. We're ready to close out this podcast strong on this 4th of July. Hopefully everyone's understanding what the 4th of July is all about. Make sure to pay honor to the country and respect the country for everything that, we're able to do, allowing knuckleheads like me to be able to be in this position where I can talk about the Raiders and have a conversation with Jon Kingdon and talk about Al Davis, right? It's the independence that we have in this country, and that's what today is, Independence Day, and it also would be Al Davis's 94th birthday. So with that being said, let's jump into part three of the conversation with Jon Kingdon, co-author Behind the Shield, where I start off asking Jon about, his best Al Davis stories. Here he is, Jon Kingdon, sharing his stories.
I kind of got to see him on a more human side than most people would. I was going to say about going into a fat burger out here. I wrote about that in the book. It was, he really liked fast food. And, I picked him up at the airport. I was going to drop him off at his place in Marina Del Rey. And says, I'd kind of like to get something to eat now. It'd be okay, anything around here. I said, there's a place called Fat Burger down the road. Yeah, let's try that. I'd like to try that. So we walk in the store. The rest, it's a fast food place, big in L.A. And we walk in, and the guy says, gee, Mr. Davis, back so soon? Was that 3 times this week? And I kind of look at him, and for the only time in my life, he looks sheepish. He says, God, I love this place. Which is why was he so embarrassed? But I think my favorite time, our scouting department was made up of, besides Bruce and myself, was made up of players, former players. Kent McClellan was a great scout, and Danny Connors, great player. Angie Koya was a guy that played for Al at the Citadel. And then when Al got booted out of there for recruiting violations, he followed Al to USC, and he was really a good scout. And then we had Mickey, who was certainly a better player than scout, but he loved when these guys would come. We would come in December and meet and then go to the game. Those guys, I lived in the area, and all those guys would come in. We would meet for a week and go over the whole draft. And Al would come in, and he would just start telling stories about Kent McClellan. And, Kent thought he was going to be a safety here. And when he started walking out there, he said, hey, get over there to corner. And he would laugh, and Kent would laugh about it. And he'd talk about Angie Koya, how great a player he was. And then I remember Bruce Allen, who was working as an executive, came up and said, I wish the scouts were in here all the time, because Al is always the happiest when you guys are meeting and those former players are in the room with him. So I think that was something he always, he never forgot the players. He loved those guys. He loved bringing them into to his annual, every 5 years he'd celebrate his birthday in Vegas. And when Gene Upshaw passed away and George Blanda passed away, he flew in every player that ever knew those guys, at any connection, and had great memories and celebration of those guys. So I think it was his love of all the players that he ever coached or were on the team when he was owning it. I think that's probably the strongest thing I could say about him.
A lot of Raider Nation, all of Raider Nation loves Amy Trask for everything that she is, all her football knowledge, obviously being the princess of darkness is what a lot of people call her, being the CEO, the first female CEO of the Raiders. What was that relationship like? What was the relationship like between Amy Trask and Al Davis?
Well, I was, she was pretty much all on the executive side, and I was on the personnel side. So, we didn't do too much. But I think, he kind of liked that. I think, from seeing the thing, she wasn't afraid to challenge him, and to kind of take him on legal issues and such. But again, she had nothing to do on personnel. But he always spoke very highly of her, and I remember. some people kind of badmouth her in the organization, and he snapped at those people. He said, "Don't ever say anything bad about Amy." Alexa off. But so just this kind of an odd story of you at the time was I'm at training camp, and this was one of the few times I was really dealing with her. There was these our training camps were closed, and there were these two Chinese women that were there, and I just asked what they were doing, and they said, they were playing basketball. They're from China, and they're playing on the Sacramento women's team. So my sister-in-law is Chinese, and she taught me about 10 things to say, and so I was walking by them. They're by the exit after practice, and I go, "Ni hao, wo hong gao shen kandowni," and I get a double take, like, what the heck is? I basically said, "Hello, it's very nice to meet you," and then they just prattle on. I got no idea what they're saying, and I just, I went on for like 10 minutes with a few things I said, and then I closed with the "Shou Shei Ni Wa Aini Zhai Zhen," which thank you, I love you, and goodbye. And they're laughing and laughing. So evidently Amy was watching this, and she went over to them and, I said, "Oh, you were talking with Jon Kingdon. What were you saying?" "Oh, he was speaking Chinese." "Really?" "Oh, yes, he was fluent." I mean, they were so polite, which I was not at all.
Right.
So the next day she sent someone up to me and said, "Amy told me how you're fluent in Chinese, and we have to have you run our Chinese website."
Nice.
And I just said, "Look, if you want me to phonetically write 'thank you, I love you' and goodbye in Chinese, but I don't think that would do it." But for some reason, she never, and I always thought it was funny and an honest kind of thing. It was something worth laughing about, but she never, after the person went back and told her that, I wasn't the guy to do it, she never acknowledged it. And I had always found that kind of funny.
That is hilarious.
But again, it was kind of funny. But she, like I said, she and Al seemed to respect her a lot and never put up with anyone saying anything negative about her. And if I brought stories to him, and they were, the press was kind of hard on her. He would get upset about that. And just one other real quick one was kind of funny was, Amy always talks. If you ever see her Twitter, she shows Al shaking hands with a guy dressed up as Darth Vader, in her Twitter stuff, something. And that reminded me, one time there was, I think, Rolling Stone had ranked all the owners in the league, and Tex Schramm was number one, and Al was number two, and the comment on Al was, has all the instincts of Darth Vader. So I brought it over to him, he starts looking at it, and he goes, "Who's Darth Vader?" Well, he's the character in the Star Wars movies that epitomizes evil. And I was kind of curious. He kind of looked at me and goes, "That's pretty good, huh?" I said, "Okay."
That's funny.
So I forgot. I always got a kick out of that story, and I forgot to put that in the book. I thought that was pretty funny too.
No, it really is. It really is. Final question for you: what is this final season in Oakland? What is that going to mean to you?
Well, the fact that when I moved up here was Oakland, and we went down to L.A., and we came back here to Oakland. I think the league is kind of sticking it to the team a little bit. I don't think for a couple of reasons. When Mark kept saying, "Well, we're going to play with the 49ers," say, "No, we're going to play in San Francisco. No, maybe we'll play in Birmingham, or maybe we'll go to Fresno." I think the league really got upset about it, and I think they set it up last year for the team, to kind of make a final goodbye. With the last home game of the year last year was against Denver, and the crowd went crazy, and they beat the Broncos, and and this year, they got this crazy schedule. I don't know if you're aware of that.
Mm-hmm.
They got two games at home, and then they don't play at home for like 7 weeks. They got two road games, and they got a home game in London, and then they got I think two more road games, and they got the bye after the London game, and two more road games, and they come back here, and then the last home game of the year is against Jacksonville, which is not a particularly historic matchup. So it's not like they've moved, but Oakland should have been like the Steelers. It's a blue collar town, and they gave them the stadium, and I really blame the people in Oakland. Way back in 1980, that had the opportunity to give them a good stadium that was appropriate, for a professional team, and they just, when I said Roselle said, you don't have to do it, they can't move, and and Al proved them, that he was right.
Right.
I'm going to leave, and so I think, that to me, when I look back on that, I think that's really the sad part, because it should have been. We should have never left Oakland. We never had to leave Oakland. We put it that way. And in the stadium, even when he came back, was just kind of putting a ribbon on a pig kind of thing. It just wasn't good. He was throwing good money after bad, and so I blame. I think back to those people in 80, 81. When the team finally left in 82, even though, remember, I don't know, in 82, we actually practiced up here all year and flew down to every home game.
Mm-hmm.
That was Marcus's rookie year. We were actually 8-1 the whole season. It was a strike year. So that traveling back and forth never hurt.
That's Jon Kingdon right there, co-author of Al Davis Behind the Shield. If you have not got it, it's available on book. It's available on audio. I mean, you just got to get it. It's been out for a minute, but if you haven't got it, definitely go get it. Jon, I appreciate your time so much. These stories are great. We could probably talk for hours on top of hours about Al and the Raiders, but as we celebrate his birthday, we appreciate your time. Thank you so much, my man.
It was great. If you just keep mentioning it, it's on Amazon. That's really the only place you can get the book. And you said Kindle and Audible and hardcover, and we've had a lot of. I appreciate how much you enjoyed it, and I truly enjoyed again talking about Al with July 4th coming up.
Absolutely, thank you so much. That's great. Appreciate you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
So there it is. There it was, Raider Nation. That was the whole conversation with Jon Kingdon, co-author of Behind the Shield from 2019, while I was a member of ESPN Central Texas. Hopefully you enjoyed that. Hopefully you're enjoying your 4th of July, no matter when you're listening to this, early in the morning, in the afternoon, or maybe late in evening, before you get ready to lay it on down and get ready to get back to the grind the next day. Coming up tomorrow, we'll get back to calls and text straight off that Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line. Again, 707-654-4693. We'll have more news and notes around the NFL and, of course, with the silver and black, and we'll have plenty of conversation as well. Again, hopefully everyone's having a great Independence Day. Again, be safe out there with the fireworks. Enjoy the time when you get with your family. Remember, respect what Independence Day is all about and pay tribute to the country, as, again, we live in a great country. It's not perfect, but it's a great country compared to, well, what a lot of other countries look like across the world. So there's no better place than I'd rather be than right here in the USA. So make sure that we pay that tribute to our country. And thank you to all the veterans. Thank you to all the active servicemen as well that continue to help with fight for our freedoms here in the USA, so we can have great things like the Locked On Raiders podcast, like sports radio, and like the silver and black. Till tomorrow, Raider Nation, take care of yourself, take care of your family, love on your family. More importantly, as always, just win, baby.